John Saber with you here for one more day as we get you set up for what should be a fantastic weekend here in the world of college football. Of course, the college football playoff, the 12-team edition, gets started tonight. You have one playoff game tonight. You're going to have Indiana traveling to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. You're going to get that game tonight. Then tomorrow, starting at 11 a.m., you're going to get Penn State and SMU. After that, you're going to get Texas and Clemson at 3 o'clock, and then you're going to get to enjoy Tennessee and Ohio State. I think the game that most people, at least here, seem to be the most interested in this weekend. That's going to be your nightcap tomorrow in primetime at 7 o'clock. So we have so much to get to today to break down all of these matchups for you, tell you what we're thinking heading into the first year of the 12-team college football playoff and how we think this bracket is going to play out over the course of the weekend. Of course, you have Alabama and Auburn basketball going on this weekend. Auburn with their big game against Purdue. If you missed the news yesterday, Bruce Pearl announced that Janai Broome, his status is still unknown for the game on Saturday, but he is going to travel with the team here to Birmingham for the Purdue game. So that would seem to be a good sign there. Even if he's not 100%, maybe he will at least be able to play on some sort of a minute count or something like that. So good news for Auburn basketball there as they have a big game coming up against Purdue. Alabama taking on Kent State in basketball this weekend. And of course, we have transfer portal news and the like. I think the big news yesterday for Auburn is you got another wide receiver commitment in Horatio Fields from Wake Forest. Had about 400 yards receiving this past year for Wake Forest. Only played 2 years there for the Demon Deacons. So has some eligibility left and just adds some more depth and some more experience to that wide receiver room for Auburn. And on the Alabama side of things, I think the best news that you got yesterday is Jam Miller made the announcement after practice for the bowl game. He was talking to the media and he essentially said, yeah, I'm locked in for next year. There's nothing that's going to take me away from Alabama, whether that had been the transfer portal or an opportunity to go and test his luck in the NFL draft waters. So that's very good news for Alabama fans that Jam Miller announced his intention to come back next year. And you're going to have another 1-2 punch next year at running back, you would expect, with Jam Miller and now Richard Young, with Justice Haynes being on the move. Still looks like he is going to end up at probably South Carolina, Ole Miss, maybe Michigan. I know Ohio State's kind of still in the mix there as well. So that's kind of the latest buzz that you have around that. If you're on the Auburn front, you also had a transfer edge rusher from Florida and TJ Searcy, who was there visiting yesterday, and things seemed like they went well with the visit there, but we will wait and see when these commitments start to roll in. But good day for both Alabama and Auburn yesterday. Not as eventful as some of the days earlier in the week, but all things looking good, especially on the Auburn front with the job they've done. Still very, very impressive in Alabama. Maybe Isaiah Horton. I know he was visiting yesterday and he's still in Tuscaloosa today, supposedly. So that would be your next big fish there if you're Alabama.
It's still a Christmas gift. Not every Christmas gift can be a Stanley or Taylor Swift tickets or something like that. Some things still have to go in the stockings, but it's still a Christmas gift. And that's still something positive. So, hey, we'll take it. Again, it may not be the biggest news, but it's good news.
That is absolutely correct. I will say we had a few listeners yesterday on Three Man Front that were, kind of joking that the Greg Byrne post from the other day, telling Alabama fans that they need to go and donate, and it's time to fight back against NIL and all of this stuff. And we had some fans come in and say, man, I feel bad for my kids. I just don't think my kids are going to have a Christmas this year now because Alabama needs me, and I got to go support the Alabama.
I had to fight and back. All right.
Sorry. That's right. Put your money where your mouth is. So I thought I got a big kick out of that yesterday. Some other news and notes from around the world of college football. We all knew this was going to happen, but now it's actually official. Pretty official. But yesterday we found out that Carson Beck is possibly going to have surgery on his elbow that he injured in the SEC championship game. But surprise, surprise, it was announced yesterday that Georgia is moving forward and planning to not have Carson Beck available, at least for the semifinal game, or the quarterfinals, excuse me, because Georgia has that first round bye after winning the SEC. So they're not playing this weekend. But it is believed that Carson Beck will not be available for them in the next round of the college football playoff. And let's be honest, he's not playing in the college football playoff. The way that his elbow was hurt, and you could just see the way that he was reacting to it, some of the things that you could tell he was saying on the sideline. And I mean, when he had to come back into that game for one play and hand the ball off, his arm was limp, and it's on his throwing arm at that. So I think Georgia's well aware of that, and I know there's a lot of Florida State fans that I've seen. Oh, well, then Georgia shouldn't be allowed in the college football playoff, and I understand where you're coming from, but they have automatic qualifiers now, so that's not really how that works.
And maybe it's just me, but I had a feeling something may have happened in the Georgia Tech game, because it looked like it wasn't nearly as bad as what happened at the end of the SEC championship game, but I think it was his left arm, whichever one it was, it looked a little off on on Georgia's last two plays. And if you notice, they ran those. Again, they have been throwing, and I remember on the sixth overtime, like, he was taken down kind of pretty hard, and the next two after that, they ran it. So I thought, I wonder if maybe something's up with his arm. Maybe just got tired. I'm not quite sure. But okay, well, they got whatever week to rest. And sure enough, maybe he got aggravated again and was able to come in just to put the exclamation point on it. But I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying something did happen, but if you found out, oh yeah, something happened in Georgia Tech game, I wouldn't be surprised.
No, I wouldn't be surprised either. And if that is the case, I also don't really blame Georgia for not disclosing anything, because then you're in a situation where, okay, let's say that he's a little bit banged up and you lose that SEC championship game. Well, if the committee knows, maybe Carson Beck's a little injured, well, that's just another bullet point for them to potentially, not
shouldn't be in.
Exactly. And so it's kind of weird that you have to play that song and dance in this day and age, but that's the precedent that was kind of set last year with Florida State. So I understand why Georgia did what they did, but I think we all were expecting Gunnar Stockton to be the guy moving forward in the college football playoff, and it appears that will be the case. But the good news, if you're Georgia, is you still have over a week to get ready for that matchup, because Georgia will not be playing until New Year's Day when they are playing in the Sugar Bowl, and they will be taking on the winner of the Notre Dame and Indiana game that you are going to see tonight. All right, so we do want to jump in and break down some of those matchups for you here, but we did have Thursday night football last night, and it was a good one last night. You had the Denver Broncos taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. Both of these teams in pretty good shape in terms of the playoff picture there in the AFC, but this was going to be a big win for the Chargers, I believe. With the win, their playoff percentage, or their playoff odds now, are at 97% likelihood that they're going to be in. I know the Denver Broncos are still in a good spot, so some playoff implications on the line. And this was just a really good football game. It was Denver kind of in control early on. You're up 21-10. Then you have something that, I'll be honest, I don't know if I've ever seen in a live football game, with the fair catch free kick, where you had the Chargers call a fair catch essentially at the end of the game on a kickoff. Then there's a penalty for interference on the fair catch, and so they get moved up, and it sets them up to where they have one free play or one untimed down, and they go for the free kick field goal, which you're allowed to do if you have a fair catch on a kickoff. But typically when you're doing that, it's at the 10-yard line, you're just taking the touchback or whatever.
So about a 90-yarder or so. I don't know if you want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I saw something that I think it was the first time this has been done in like over 40 years in a college or Division I college football game. In an NFL game. So it's just not something that you see very often. If you're watching the game going, what the heck's going on? I think that's where a lot of people were, because you just don't see this happen very often. But it was very cool after the game to hear Harbaugh kind of talk about his special teams coach and how that's something they practice every single week. And they have practiced every single week since the special teams coach has been there. And you never know when it's going to come in handy. And it came in handy last night. And ultimately, it made it a one-possession game there going into halftime. And that kind of sparked the Chargers in the second half as they outscore the Broncos 21-6 in the second half, en route to a 34-27 victory. Good game for Bo Nix last night. Bo Nix, again, continuing to impress people around the NFL. He was 29 of 40 for 263 yards, couple of touchdowns and no interceptions. Added 3 carries for 25 yards on the ground as well. Justin Herbert also very, very good. 23 of 31, 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception that he threw there at the goal line that looked like it was going to be very, very costly, and it was at the time for the Chargers, but they were able to bounce back there. So a very impressive performance there from the Los Angeles Chargers. And, you know, I don't know where everyone was on Harbaugh going back to the NFL and what your expectations were for him, but I think this is exactly what the Los Angeles Chargers were looking for. And he's essentially picking up right where he left off when he was in San Francisco, and he did such a fantastic job there. And now coming over to a very, very talented Chargers team that, you know, they have the quarterback, they have some really nice pieces on defense. They've done a lot of good things on the offensive line. But they did lose all of their receivers essentially. And so to be able to make this work with, you know, the Lad McConkeys and the Quentin Johnsons of the world, I'm very impressed with the job that Harbaugh has done there in Los Angeles this year. And he has his team set up to make a postseason run.
They aren't officially in the playoffs with this win. Had the Broncos won, they would have been in, and for sure. The Chargers still technically need a little help after this win, but the way that they are playing and going, it's all but certain that they will be in. And to do this in his first year probably should be surprising, but ultimately it's not, because you forget with all of the goofiness and just weirdness and probable cheating that he'd done over the last year, and the goofiness has been there for quite some time, like how good of a coach he really is. And yeah, his first several years at Michigan didn't go all that great. But when he finally got his stuff together, look what happened.
Yeah.
And it looked like, I don't know, maybe a switch flipped, and he just was able to bring that over to the NFL. And if you're a Chargers fan, it probably is making you bang your head against the wall, because for the most part, you've had all these players all along.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, you've had a couple of good seasons, maybe a hint of a postseason run, but it looks like Harbaugh's finally really building something there. And to be able to not only be like this, but also to do it in the division with the Chiefs, like, you know, all right, well, I know I'm not winning the division. I know I'm going to be on the road no matter what, but the way that they're playing, that may not be a problem.
No, you're right. I mean, even with, you know, you throw the Broncos in there too. I mean, the Raiders, I mean, we know what the Raiders are, but
yeah,
I mean, the AFC West it's not the NFC North where you have 3 teams with double-digit wins already, but I mean, it's one of the more competitive divisions in the NFL this year. And so for him to go in there and with the job, of course, we all know the Chiefs, but the job that Sean Payton's done there with Bo Nix and the Broncos is really impressive. And yeah, for his first year to have them right here. I mean, the last time we saw the Chargers in the playoffs, I believe, was when they blew that 27 or 30 point lead that they had over the Jaguars, and then they absolutely blew it. And yeah, so hopefully Jim Harbaugh is able to get the Chargers into the postseason and make a little noise there, because the Chargers, I mean, my entire life, the Chargers have always been a very talented team, going back to the Phillip Rivers and LaDainian Tomlinson days when they were legitimately one of the best teams in the NFL in the regular season. And then they choked every single year when they got in the playoffs. So maybe this is the year that kind of turns around for them. But really quickly here, if you are, you know, maybe just now starting to turn some of your attention to the NFL with the postseasons right around the corner, real quick, just give you kind of a look at the playoff picture as it stands right now in the NFL. So in the AFC, you have the 1 seed would be the Kansas City Chiefs right now at 13-1. Then you have the Buffalo Bills, Pittsburgh Steelers, Houston Texans. Those are your 4 division leaders right now. And then you have the Ravens, Chargers, and Broncos would be your 3 wild card teams. And then on the NFC side of the bracket, you will have the Detroit Lions, who currently have the number 1 seed right now. Then you have the Philadelphia Eagles, the Tampa Bay Bucks, the Los Angeles Rams. Those are your 4 division leaders right now. And then your 3 wild cards, the Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers, and Washington Commanders. So we could have the NFC North and AFC West both getting 3 teams from their division into the postseason this year, which is pretty impressive.
And all the Chargers and Broncos have to do now is just win a game, and they're both locked in.
Yeah, because the team behind them is the Colts, and
right, yeah.
I think the Colts have like a 10% chance or something like that. And I mean, technically, the Dolphins and Bengals are still alive too, if you know they win the rest of their games, and the Chargers and Broncos lose the rest of their games.
Yeah.
And
but the Broncos' next opponent is at Cincinnati, so Yeah,
That
they
makes
never
it a little
quite
more
know. Yeah.
intriguing.
Denver's remaining schedule after this, again, had they won yesterday, they'd have been in. And they're sitting at 9-6. Denver, to get a playoff spot, all they got to do is win one of their next two games, or if I think the Colts and Dolphins and Bengals all lose. But they have at Bengals and Chiefs. So seems kind of, not that the Bengals are a great team right now, but they're fighting for their lives. And who knows where the Chiefs will be, whether or not Mahomes will be playing or whether everything will be locked up and they may not care. So Chargers pretty much locked in because they have Patriots and Raiders left. So yeah, they
Yeah.
pretty much got it. Now Baltimore was interesting with Steelers, Texans, and Browns still left.
Mm-hmm.
So not to say they'll go 0-3 in that stretch, but oof, that looks tough.
Yeah, the Ravens definitely have a little bit of work to do here over the last few weeks of the season. But that is your NFL playoff rundown, as well as a recap of what we saw last night. A very good game there again, as the Chargers take down the Broncos 34-27. Much better than the Rams game we got last week. That game was just abysmal. You did also have the R&L Carriers New Orleans Bowl last night, as Sam Houston State took on Georgia Southern. Sam Houston getting the 31-26 win, and talk about a pretty good turnaround from Sam Houston, because they really struggled last year. If you remember when they came up to the FBS ranks, and now back to double-digit wins. They go 10-3 on the season. So a very nice year there for Sam Houston. Congrats on your bowl win last night. You do have, of course, the college football playoff coming up tonight, which we are about to break down in just a few minutes. But you do have two other bowl games going on today as well. Coming up at 11 a.m., you're going to have JSU and Ohio there at the Staff DNA Cure Bowl. So that's going to be an 11 a.m. kick there from Orlando, Florida. And then coming up at 2:30 in the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl, you're going to have Tulane and Florida going to battle there at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, Florida. Florida, a 10-point favorite in that one right now. That's a very sneaky good bowl game, in my opinion. So those both coming up for you today. And of course, the college football playoff then getting started later on tonight. So when we return here on Morning JOX, we are going to start breaking down these matchups for you. We have 4 college football playoff games coming up this weekend. We're going to tell you what you need to know for each of the matchups. And of course, it is a Final Score Friday here on Morning JOX. So text in 205-834-9450. How do you see the games going this weekend? What are your final score predictions for the first round of the college football playoffs? We break down those matchups and hear from you when we return. 622, welcome back into Morning JOX here on your Friday morning. Appreciate you tuning in this morning, and it is a glorious day because later on tonight, the college football playoff gets underway. We've been waiting for this moment. I know some fans here, myself included, a little disappointed that a team from the state of Alabama is not going to be in play in the college football playoff, but we do have 3 SEC teams that maybe you can find it in your heart to root for them. Maybe you've adopted an underdog like a Boise State or Arizona State, and you're gonna, that's who you're gonna cheer for.
So you'd have been okay if Auburn made it for a team from the state of Alabama.
It would have been more interesting for us.
Okay,
at work.
All right, but you said you wanted a team from the state of Alabama in.
Well, there's one team that I would have preferred to be in, but
UAB.
if I,
Okay.
but if all I could get was Auburn, I'll take that.
Oh, okay.
That would be interesting too, and it would be good for all of our wonderful, loyal Auburn listeners as well. But yes, I mean, obviously, I would have not minded to see Alabama in the college football playoff, but they didn't deserve it. And so here we are, and we are left with Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee as the SEC representation there. And again, the college football playoff getting underway tonight with Indiana and Notre Dame. Before we break down that game, though, let me just tell you really quick. I know this was a rumor that had been floating around, and there was some reports that this was, I guess something that was potentially going to happen. And that being the Jacksonville State head coaching opening. Again, their bowl game kicks off at 11 a.m. today against Ohio. But there were some reports coming out that Bryant Vincent, the former UAB interim head coach and now the head coach at Louisiana Monroe, was in the mix there for the Jacksonville State job. And we found out last night that he has removed his name from consideration for that job opening. And so he is planning to stay there at Louisiana Monroe. So the search continues for JSU as they look to replace Rich Rodriguez, who left for West Virginia a handful of days ago. So that would have been a cool story. Again, of course, Bryant Vincent did a wonderful job as the offensive coordinator and then interim coach here at UAB. I know a lot of people would like to see him return to the state of Alabama, but it looks like that is not going to be the case, at least for right now. So we will see and continue to update you when we hear anything on that front for the JSU coaching search. All right, college football playoff time. First game tonight, you have Indiana taking on Notre Dame. Of course, both of these teams 11-1, a game of 2 teams within the state of Indiana. So you get that kind of interesting dynamic to the matchup. It is going to be frigid for this game tonight. The expectation is going to be high 20s tonight when the game kicks off at 7 p.m. But, maybe not as big of a factor when you have 2 teams like Notre Dame and Indiana that are going to be a little more used to that weather. But I think this game is going to be very, very interesting for a few reasons. And part of that is, I think this is, look, I understand we all kind of have our jokes about Notre Dame and, they've been a good program here in recent memory. Of course, they made a national championship. They made a couple college football playoffs, but it felt like every time they got into the spotlight, they got embarrassed. They didn't just lose, but they lost in dominating fashion to whoever they were playing. I think this team, and I know they lost to Northern Illinois earlier in the year, I think this is the best Notre Dame team that we've seen in a while. I think they are the most balanced. I think they have the most talent, because that was always the big thing, right? Is Notre Dame had good players. They had talented players, but then when they had to go and match up with, an Alabama or a team like that from the SEC or an Ohio State or even a Clemson, back when they were on their run, you just saw that the eye test, their dudes just didn't match up with the other dudes from elite programs. And now they seem to be in a much different spot than that. This is a team that likes to run the football a lot. Riley Leonard, the Duke transfer, kind of struggled to find his footing a little bit earlier in the year, but they have kind of catered this offense around him and his ability mainly to use his legs. He is a big threat there. And as we know with Indiana, they like to air this thing out with Curtis Rourke. And so they kind of have two different styles of play there. Indiana, of course, one of the best defensive teams statistically over the course of the season. Notre Dame, very good as well. But I think, you can look at Indiana and a lot of us go, all right, it's cool that they're in the playoff. It's a great story. First double-digit win season in school history. Kurt Cignetti coming over from James Madison, having the success is really cool to see. But, man, the one time they got tested against Ohio State, it just didn't go very well for them. And I'll be completely honest with you, it is hard for me to get that out of my head going into this game because, you did. You had one chance to kind of prove to people that you belonged. And again, you really weren't competitive in that football game whatsoever. I mean, you drive down the field, score early in that game. It looks like, okay, Indiana's here to play. And after that, it was all Ohio State for the rest of that game and the rest of that Saturday. So, if you're Indiana, this is, I mean, I don't think it's any stretch to say this is the biggest game in school history, right? Getting to go and play for a college football playoff and potentially continue on your journey for a national championship. So, how do you respond to that spotlight? Because that's something that, I'll get to with SMU as well, and kind of what we saw from them in the ACC championship game and how that might translate. But I look at this Notre Dame team and they are so sound. They are really solid up front. They're really solid in the trenches, and that stuff is really, really important, particularly when it's going to be 27 degrees outside. And when you're good in the trenches and you can run the football, that typically is going to be a very, very good combination for you there. The one thing you could take away from this, if you're an Indiana fan, is the last time we saw Notre Dame, they played a USC team that I think we could all agree is pretty average at best this year. And they were able to throw for over 350 yards against Notre Dame. So if you're Indiana, you have the best quarterback in terms of a thrower of the football, a pure passer that you've seen all year long. And so if you're Indiana, that gives you some hope that, all right, we are going to bring something to the table that Notre Dame hasn't had to deal with yet, because we know they can stop the run, right? We saw what they did to Army and Navy and those types of football teams, but Indiana's designed a little bit differently. So, I'll be honest, if it was maybe at a neutral site and maybe a little bit warmer, I might be more inclined to lean Indiana, or at least lean them to cover. What I'm looking at right now, Notre Dame, a 7-point favorite now in this game tonight as it stands right now. I just think Notre Dame's too good, man. I think Notre Dame's too good. I think that they realize this is kind of their opportunity. This is their time to finally say, hey, we got to the dance, and now we're going to make some noise here. We're not just going to go and, get blown out by 28 and go home and be happy that we made the playoff. I think they want to make a statement, and I just have questions about Indiana's ability to match up against the elite programs in college football. I'm not convinced that they're there yet.
Well, the Ohio State game is one that you said obviously sits on your mind. You can't take that away. Let's not forget who they played the week before in that 5-5 Michigan team. 5-4 heading into that. That was a game that, yes, Indiana won, and they were up fairly significant. I think it was 17-3, whatever, at the half. But Michigan clawed and fought their way back in that. And
yeah, they scored 3 points in the second half.
Yeah,
Indiana,
Lawton, I think, only had 55 yards rushing in that game. Now, to be fair, they were up early, so they may not have needed to run the ball. But you would think you were up 17-3. All you have to do is just run the ball, and you'd be good. But Rourke threw one of his he had an interception. The game only passed for 206 yards. So one thing also for for Indiana, this is one of the of the three weather games that we're going to get. I don't think it's going to affect the other team, because they're both in the same state that much. And so plus, not that any road team this week will be scared to go play and afraid or whatever, but Indiana, even though it's not a rivalry, it is in state, and so you've got a bunch of people in there, that know each other, and the mystique of Notre Dame, I don't think, is going to affect Indiana. Whereas I can see the mystique of Penn State potentially affecting SMU, or I know Clemson will be ready to travel into Austin, but I could see maybe. And that said, Tennessee is known to a big kind of stadium, so it's like they're going on the road in an SEC stadium, so it won't be all that different. But I don't see Indiana being affected by going into South Bend to be able to play that way. So that being said, I do think Notre Dame is substantially more talented. I do think this is a game that will probably be a heavyweight battle. They'll trade blows back and forth because, yes, Notre Dame can win the game either way, but so can Indiana. Now, they won, for most of their games, they won with blowouts, but they won by running the ball as well as throwing it all over too. So if whatever game they need to play, they'll be able to do it, I believe. But I think in the end, Notre Dame's talent will win out, and Notre Dame wins by probably, I think they may technically cover when all is said and done, but I do think it's a one possession back and forth kind of game.
Yeah. So I don't see it all that differently from you, Saber. I think it'll be I expect it to be a competitive game, but I do just think ultimately at the end of the day, like you said, Notre Dame is just they're more talented. They're going to be more physical. And this is a big moment. I think they look at this as a big moment for their program moving forward of, hey, it's a new era of the college football playoff, and we want to make a statement in year one that, this isn't going to be like it was in the 4-team era
Right.
where every time we got in, we ultimately got embarrassed. So Saber and I both leaning Notre Dame in the game tonight. I like Notre Dame by, kind of like what you were saying, Saber. I like them to win maybe about 10, something like that, where it's, a competitive game, but at the same time, I don't know if you're a Notre Dame fan, if you're really going to be that stressed, at least in my opinion, with just how I think this game is going to break down. But we do have 3 more college football playoff matchups to get to. So when we return here on Morning Jocks, we'll break down those games as well. We will also hear from you on the Courtesy GMC text line 205-834-9450. Final score Friday. What are your final score predictions for the college football playoff? We will hear from you next here on Jocks 94.5. Oh, Damian Saver band.
Oh, he knows Creed. That's good to
know. Welcome back into Morning JOX. JOX 94.5 here on your Friday morning, getting you set for the college football playoff kicking off tonight. We just broke down Indiana Notre Dame. That game coming your way tonight at 7 o'clock. So now we move to the Saturday slate of games where you have SMU and Penn State kicking things off at 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. This is going to be an interesting game. Now, we talked about the weather in the Notre Dame game and how it's going to be cold there tonight. It's going to be even a little bit chillier for this game tomorrow in Happy Valley. It's going to be in the mid to low 20s tomorrow. It's going to be absolutely frigid. And this one maybe has a little more impact on the game because you have a team from the state of Texas. I saw a stat where the average temp for an SMU kickoff this year was 72 degrees. It is currently projected to be 26 degrees at kickoff tomorrow in Happy Valley. So do with that information what you will, but maybe a little more of an impact from the weather in this game than what we saw when we were talking about Notre Dame and Indiana. I think this game is obviously going to be interesting for people here in our listening area because you want to see what the team that got in over Alabama has to show. And we're going to find out on Saturday. I will just go ahead and say this about SMU. My biggest concern with SMU is what you saw in the ACC championship, where for the first half of that football game, they did not look like a football team that could handle the pressure of being in a moment where your season was essentially on the line or potentially on the line in terms of you win, you go to the college football playoff, you lose, you leave your fate up to the hands of the college football playoff committee. And I mean, it was just stupid mistakes, penalties, drop passes, turnovers, just all of the things you cannot do in a big game. SMU did every single one of those things early on in that game. Now, granted, they did settle down. They had a nice comeback there in the second half, and they lose ultimately on that last second field goal by Clemson. But that's really where this starts for me, because if SMU comes out like that in this game, they're done. It's not, you're not coming back against Penn State in Happy Valley in 25-degree weather in the college football playoff. You cannot convince me that that's going to happen. And we're going to learn a lot about SMU because this is, you want to play with the big boys. All right, this is your opportunity to prove that you belong. And so we will find that out tomorrow morning. I will say the good news, if you're an SMU fan or an SMU supporter this weekend, in terms of your rush defense, that's kind of been your strength this year. If you're SMU going up against a Penn State that we know likes to run the football a lot. The one thing, though, that I think we all learned last week is that, I'll be honest, I didn't think Penn State, if they ever got into a shootout, was going to be able to keep up. And as we saw against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, they can do that. They still lost, but they lost 45-37. And I think they showed something offensively that a lot of people wanted to see going into the playoff, to have optimism that, hey, maybe this Penn State team is a little different than the teams we've seen here in recent memory. And if you're SMU, your pass defense, that's kind of been your Achilles heel. You've been really good against the run, not very good against the pass. They have a top 10 run defense, but they're somewhere in the 80s, 90s when it comes to pass defense. And so if you're Penn State, you kind of look at what Drew Aller was able to do against Oregon, and maybe you say, hey, let's try to air this thing out a little bit more, maybe catch SMU off guard, and that seems to be the weakness of their defense. So let's go and attack that with Tyler Warren, who has been probably the best tight end in all of college football this year. So I think if you're Penn State, that's probably kind of the angle that you're looking at there. And if you're SMU, it's going to come down to your defense, right? Are you able to limit Penn State? Are you able to do what, an Ohio State was able to do early in the year where, they made multiple goal line stands in that game to hold Penn State to 10 points, 13 points, whatever it was, and hold them off. I think that's where it is. If you're SMU, your defense is really going to have to step up. You're going to have to be able to run the football effectively. And I mean, you're going to have to grind this one out, I think, if you're SMU. But again, it's hard for me to, based on what we saw in the ACC championship, now it's an even bigger stage. You're not playing at a neutral site. It's going to be freezing cold outside. It's just hard for me to think that SMU has what it takes to go on the road to Happy Valley and knock off a Penn State team that, similarly to Notre Dame, I think is the best version of Penn State that we've seen here recently. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to go win the national championship necessarily, but I certainly think they can take care of business against SMU tomorrow.
I expect them to win. I expect them ultimately to cover. I think this game will play out a lot like the Clemson game. I do think that SMU is capable of keeping it close with Penn State, but ultimately I don't think that they will, because someone like Tyler Warren, I just don't know if SMU has the horses to be able to. I mean, I know they can keep up with him, but with his versatility, it's going to be a big ask for SMU's defense to be able to find a way to consistently stop that guy. And even if they do, Drew Aller's been playing out of his mind. So I suspect this game will maybe be kind of close early on, but I think ultimately Penn State will pull away. And yeah, I think they cover. I think they win. I don't know if you just look at the score like, oh, Penn State had the win. Well, it was kind of a game a little bit, but I think Penn State out rosters them and ultimately gets the win.
Yeah, so we're not doing our because I agree with you, Sabres. So we're not going to do our like Damien and I normally do on Fridays, where we just kind of go and run through our picks real quick. We'll just do them as we've gone through and breaking down these games, because we want to spend plenty of time talking about the matchups themselves. But if you're keeping score at home, Saber and I both like Notre Dame over Indiana tonight, and then we both like Penn State to take down SMU tomorrow morning. But now let's get to SEC country, where you have the next game on the slate, which will be a 3 p.m. kick tomorrow. Between the Clemson Tigers and the Texas Longhorns there from Austin, Texas. I will say, I think this is a game that I think might be a little closer than some people are expecting. I know that, look, Clemson played one good game against a competent team this year, and it was what they did against SMU. And, we could also say that they almost choked it away. But going into this matchup, I think what Clemson brings to the table up front defensively, I think they can cause Texas to have some problems offensively. And let's be honest, as we've seen with Texas this year, they're not as explosive offensively as I think a lot of us expected them to be, right? Like, I'm not going to be surprised if this is a 24-21 or a 27-21, like that type of a football game. I'm not necessarily expecting a ton of offense. And a lot of that is because Texas is really, really good defensively, and Clemson, at least up front, is really, really solid defensively as well. As we know, Texas has shown an ability to run the football at times, but they're so banged up at running back. The run game has been a little bit hit or miss for them this year. I do want to know, and this is something, we talked with Eric Henry on 3-Man Front earlier this week about this game, and one of the things I asked him was about Arch Manning, because I think that's something that from the SEC championship surprised a lot of us, was we didn't see Arch Manning a whole lot. You really didn't see him at all until overtime. And that had been a big part of what you saw them do against Texas A&M, for example, where he's kind of a change of pace option. You bring him in there. I understand it probably makes things maybe a little awkward in the quarterback room, with that being, the system they were kind of running later in the season. But I feel like this is an opportunity where you can use his legs to your advantage if you're Texas. And I would expect them to get him involved a little earlier on. It also looks like Isaiah Bond might not be able to play in this game because he's dealing with an injury and his status is pretty uncertain right now. So that would be another knock for Texas, losing one of their best wide receivers there. But I mean, this Clemson team, I just look at, again, it's Texas, and we've seen them really play one good team this year, and it was Georgia twice, and they lost twice. And we've seen Clemson play Georgia this year, and they got absolutely embarrassed by them. Similarly to, now granted, it was worse than what Georgia did to Texas in the regular season, but I just think both of these teams defensively, I see this being more of a defensive matchup. I think it's going to be a close game. I think Texas is the better team. I think Texas is ultimately who wins this football game. But I think a lot of people have just kind of written Clemson off of, oh, they don't deserve to be here. They just kind of got lucky by beating SMU and getting a spot here in the playoff. But hey, Dabo's been here plenty of times. He knows what it takes to win in the college football playoff. He knows what it's like to compete against the top teams in the country. And I think he'll be able to keep it close with Texas, but ultimately I do think that Texas gets the win.
This is probably the most, I don't want to say lopsided, but mismatched game of all. I think Texas rolls.
You think so?
I think Clemson will put up a bit of a fight, but I think Texas is just too much for them. That's it. Yeah, if it ends up being 24-21, 27-24, something like that, that wouldn't surprise me. But I think after the close call that was Georgia, I think Sark's going to definitely double. And it's like, all right, never again. We're making sure that's not going to happen. I think they're going to put it to Clemson.
Well, that's a fair point. I mean, I could certainly see that happening. I think Texas is definitely the better team. It's just, at times this year, I haven't been the most impressed with Texas, and they haven't been, again, as good on the offensive side of the ball as I expected at times. And 12 points is a lot in a college football playoff game. Granted, we've seen it happen plenty of times with blowouts in these playoff matchups. But okay, so Saber likes Texas. He likes Texas big. I like Texas, but I like Clemson to cover. Texas is a 12-point favorite right now. That's kind of a lot. I like Texas to win. Again, like I said, I'm not gonna be shocked if it's a field goal, but I could see it being 27-20, something like that. But we do have one more game to get to. Tennessee, Ohio State. I think the game everyone is most excited for this weekend. So we return here on Morning JOX. We will break down Tennessee versus Ohio State in the college football playoff. 6:51. Welcome into Morning JOX. A few more minutes here with Conrad and Saber before we hand you off to McElroy and Kubelik in the morning. They'll be with you from 7 to 10, and then I will be back alongside Pat Smith and Molly Robinson for a three-man front. And then, of course, the Paul Feinbaum Show will take you into your weekend from 2 to 6 right here on JOX 94.5. All right, if you are just now tuning in, we've broken down the first three matchups of the college football playoff. Saber and I both liking Notre Dame over Indiana tonight. We both like Penn State over SMU tomorrow. We both like Texas to win over Clemson. I like Texas in a close game over Clemson. Saber likes Texas to roll and win big over the Fighting Dabos tomorrow. So that is where we stand right now, but we do have one more game to get to, and it is the big one with Tennessee traveling up to Columbus, Ohio to take on an Ohio State team. Again, another game that is going to be in frigid conditions. I think it does impact these teams. Like, we're all human, right? When you walk outside and it's 25 degrees out there, it's cold. Now, granted, that doesn't mean that it's going to ultimately have an impact on who wins the game or how well a team performs. But I think going in, it's fair to assume that that's something that may ultimately play a role. However, I think in Tennessee's case, I'll be honest, I think Tennessee wins this game straight up. I think they match up very well against Ohio State. And I think a big part of that is both of these teams are, probably two of the 4 or 5 best defenses in all of college football this year. So again, I think it's probably going to be a lower scoring game. We know Ohio State, what they have there with Henderson and Judkins in the backfield and their rushing attack, but Tennessee's running it. They are elite when it comes to running the football. And I think that is what gives Tennessee a big advantage in this game is defensively. They are really, really solid. We know the problems that they can cause with their pass rushers and their defensive front. And that was something that we saw going back to the Michigan game where they just offensively, Ohio State could not do anything. And I could honestly see this going kind of similarly for Tennessee because I think that while defensively they're even better than Michigan was, offensively they are significantly better than Michigan was. Now, that doesn't mean the game's going to play out the same way. Ohio State's very talented. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised if either of these teams win this game. I just look at Tennessee, and I just think the matchup works out in their favor with their defense and their rushing attack. I like Nico. I think Nico has a higher ceiling. Like, if you need somebody to make a big play for you, I'm going to trust Josh Heupel and Nico in that offense more than I am Will Howard in that Ohio State offense right now. So it's going to be a tough matchup for Tennessee. I think whoever wins this game, they're going to have a ton of momentum going into the Oregon matchup in the quarterfinals. I think this is going to be the best game that we get out of the first round of the playoff. But I like Tennessee. Ohio State's a 7-point favorite. I like Tennessee to go in. I like them to win by a touchdown on the road.
I think Tennessee does cover, but I think Ohio State wins because as great as Tennessee's offense is, they're a second-half team. And just like you said with SMU and Penn State, against not only what Ohio State has, but the way they played in their last game and everything they have in front of them, if Ohio State gets a lead, I don't think they're going to relinquish it. So I think Ohio State comes out playing strong. I think Tennessee will be a little flat. I think Tennessee's down big. I think they come back, but ultimately Ohio State wins the game.
Well, there we have it. Saber and I both on Notre Dame, Penn State, Texas. Saber likes Texas to win big. I like Tennessee to pull off the upset over Ohio State, and Saber likes Ohio State to win a close one there over the Vols. So appreciate you tuning in. McElroy and Kubelik in the morning.